The fluorescent lights in HR's fishbowl office flickered like they were about to give up. And honestly, so was I. I sat there with my hands folded neat on my lap, watching Cynthia from HR shuffle papers she'd already shuffled twice, and I knew. You always know. There's a smell to these meetings. Cheap printer toner, stale coffee, and something else. Something like pity mixed with paperwork. The AC was cranked too high, the way corporate always does when they're about to sweat you. Across from me sat Bradley Coulter, 28 years old, freshly minted MBA from some school with ivy on the walls and a tuition higher than my first house. He wore a slim-cut navy suit that probably cost more than my truck payment, and he was smiling at me like we were about to shake hands on a golf course. His teeth were too white. That's the first thing I noticed. Nobody's teeth are that white unless they've never had to worry about a dental cape. "Frank," Cynthia started, real gentle, like she was talking to a spooked animal. "We appreciate everything you've built here at Meridian Logistics. 22 years is remarkable." She said remarkable like it was a synonym for expired. I already knew where this was going. I'd seen the org chart leak in a shared drive 2 weeks earlier that some intern forgot to lock down. My name wasn't on it. Bradley's was, right where mine used to be, Vice President of Regional Operations. My title, my seat, my 22 years of blood and diesel fumes and Christmas Eves in a warehouse. "We're moving in a new direction," Cynthia continued. "Bradley here has some fresh perspectives on our supply chain infrastructure, and we'd like to—" She paused, searching for the word, "restructure your role." Bradley leaned forward like he'd been waiting all morning for his line. "Frank, I want you to know this isn't personal. I really admire what you've done here. I'd love to keep you on in an advisory capacity. Say $42,000 a year, consultant status. You could work from home 3 days a week. Quick note before we go deeper. Drop a comment and let me know what city or country you're watching from. I want to see how far this story is traveling." 42,000. From 185. That's a 77% cut. And they wanted me to smile and thank them for the opportunity to train the guy replacing me on how to do the job I'd spent 2 decades perfecting. To sit in a back room somewhere and mentor the kid who'd stolen my chair while he called me by my first name like we were fraternity brothers. I didn't say anything for a good 10 seconds, just looked at Bradley. Really looked. This kid didn't know a warehouse pick list from a bill of lading. He'd spent our last quarterly review asking why we still use paper backups. Because, son, when the system crashes at 3 a.m. and a driver in Bakersfield needs to know which pallet goes where, paper doesn't need a Wi-Fi signal. "I'll need to review the offer," I said, calm, steady. The voice I used with angry clients at midnight when a shipment got flagged at customs. Cynthia's shoulders dropped in relief. Bradley beamed like I just complimented his cologne. He slid a folder across the table. "Take your time, Frank, really. No pressure. No pressure. Effective immediately, but no pressure." I stood up, took the folder, and walked out of that office without breaking stride. My knees were shaking by the time I hit the parking lot, but I didn't let it show. Not once. I climbed into my truck, sat behind the wheel, and just stared at the dashboard like it was going to tell me what the hell had just happened. 22 years. 2 decades of holidays worked, weekends missed, birthdays cut short. I'd built the Southwest distribution network from 3 trucks and a leased warehouse in Reno to a $42 million operation covering 9 states. And they were handing my desk to a kid who'd never loaded a pallet in his life. But here's what Bradley didn't know. Here's what none of them knew. That folder in my hand, it was gasoline, and I had been carrying a match in my pocket for a very, very long time. I drove home that night on autopilot, taking the long way through the industrial park just to buy myself some time. Past the Meridian warehouse where I'd spent more nights than I could count. Past the truck stop diner where I'd interviewed half our drivers over lukewarm coffee. Past the freight yard where I'd personally negotiated our first big contract with Sunbelt Grocers back in '07, the deal that put us on the map. Every landmark felt like a tombstone. I pulled into my driveway around 7, killed the engine, and just sat there. My wife Diane's car was in the garage. The porch light was on. Inside, my daughter Emma was probably at the kitchen table, hunched over college applications she was too smart for and we were too broke to fully fund without my salary. She was 17, a straight-A student, wanted to go to UCLA for engineering. Tuition was $52,000 a year, room and board another 20, and I'd just been handed a piece of paper that said my earning power had been sliced by nearly 80%. I couldn't go inside yet, not with my hands still shaking. Not with that folder on the passenger seat looking at me like a loaded gun. So I sat there and I let myself remember. I remembered 2003, 26 years old, freshly divorced from my first wife, sleeping on my brother's couch in a bad part of Sacramento. Meridian Logistics wasn't even called Meridian back then. It was Coast-Track Freight, run out of a converted mechanics bay by a guy named Sal Menendez, who chain-smoked Marlboros and paid us cash on Fridays out of a metal lockbox. I started as a dispatcher making $11.50 an hour, slept in the office 3 nights a week because I couldn't afford gas to drive back to my brother's. I remembered 2008 when the recession hit and we lost 40% of our accounts in 6 months. Sal called us all into the break room and said he was going to have to close the doors. I'd been there 5 years by then. I stood up in that break room and told Sal I'd take a 50% pay cut and personally cold call every regional grocer between Portland and Phoenix if he'd let me try to save the company. He looked at me like I was insane. Then he handed me the phone. We didn't close. 6 months later, we were back in the black. A year after that, we doubled. Sal cried when he signed the papers selling the company to Meridian Holdings in 2011. He handed me an envelope with $20,000 in it, called it a thank you. I used it to put a down payment on the house I was now sitting in front of, trying to figure out how to keep. I remember 2015 when my dad had his stroke. Meridian was in the middle of the biggest expansion in company history, launching the Southwest Hub. I worked from his hospital room for 11 days straight, held his hand with one hand and typed emails with the other. He died on a Tuesday. I was back at the warehouse Wednesday because the Kroger contract renegotiation couldn't wait. My mother didn't speak to me for 6 months. I remembered every single one of those moments while I sat in that driveway, and I remembered why. Because I believed in something. I believed that if you worked hard enough, if you gave enough, the company would remember. That loyalty was a two-way street. What a stupid, expensive belief. I finally went inside around 8. Diane took one look at my face and knew. She didn't ask, just poured me a bourbon and sat down across from me at the kitchen table. I told her everything. The meeting, Bradley's stupid teeth, the 42,000, the consulting bit. She listened without interrupting, which is how I knew she was furious. When I was done, she reached across the table and took my hand. "Frank," she said, "what are you going to do?" I looked at her. And for the first time all day, I smiled. "I'm going to make a phone call." The phone call I needed to make was to a man named Dale Kowalski. Dale had been my counterpart at Ridgeline Freight for 15 years. Ridgeline was our biggest competitor in the Southwest, a family-owned outfit out of Phoenix run by 2 brothers who'd built the company from a single flatbed truck their father left them. Dale was their VP of operations, my exact mirror image on the other side of the fence. We'd been at each other's throats for accounts for over a decade, but somewhere along the way we'd started grabbing dinner at industry conferences, comparing war stories over steaks and old fashions. 2 years back, Dale had cornered me at a shipping expo in Vegas. Half-drunk, cigar in hand, he'd looked me in the eye and said, "Frank, the day Meridian ever pushes you out, you call me. I don't care what time, I don't care what day, you call me first." I'd laughed it off at the time. Told him Meridian would never let me go. He'd just shaken his head and said, "Corporate always eats its own eventually. Remember what I said?" I remembered. I waited until after Emma went to bed, sat in my home office with the door closed and dialed Dale's cell from memory. He picked up on the second ring. "Frank Halloran, this better be good, it's almost 10. "Dale, they did it." There was a pause on the other end, then a low whistle. "Talk to me." I told him everything. The MBA kid. The pay cut. The consulting insult. Dale didn't interrupt once. When I finished, there was a longer pause, then he said something I'll never forget. "Frank, you sit tight. Don't sign a damn thing. Don't respond to their offer. I'm calling the brothers tonight. You'll hear from me by noon tomorrow." He hung up. I sat there in the dark, staring at my phone, wondering if I'd just done something stupid or something brilliant. I barely slept that night, kept running the numbers in my head, kept thinking about my non-compete clause. Meridian had made everyone sign one back in 2016 after they'd lost 2 directors to a competitor in Denver. Standard 12 months, no soliciting clients, no working for direct competitors within the same regional footprint. I'd signed it without a lawyer because I'd trusted the company. Rookie mistake. But here's the thing about non-competes in California, and Meridian's regional operations were headquartered in Sacramento. California courts don't enforce them. Almost never. It's practically state policy. Arizona, where Ridgeline was based, a different story but negotiable with the right legal team. I already knew all this because 2 years earlier I'd quietly consulted with an employment attorney out of curiosity, back when the first rumors of Meridian looking at operational efficiencies had started floating around. I'd paid $400 out of pocket for a 1-hour consultation and walked out with a folder full of notes I'd been keeping in my home safe ever since. Turns out that $400 was going to be the best investment of my career. At 6:30 the next morning, my phone buzzed. Dale, Frank, breakfast, Marley's Diner on Fair Oaks, 7:30, don't be late. I was there at 7:15. Dale walked in at 7:25 with a man I recognized from industry photos, Curtis Ridgeline himself, the older brother, 68 years old, silver hair, wearing a barn coat over a button-down like he'd just come from feeding horses, which he probably had. Curtis slid into the booth across from me, ordered black coffee without looking at the menu, and got straight to it. Frank, Dale's been telling me about you for 8 years. I've read every industry piece written about the Southwest expansion you ran at Meridian. My brother and I have a proposition. He reached into his coat and pulled out a manila envelope, slid it across the table. Open it, he said, and take your time. I opened it, and what I saw inside changed everything. Inside that envelope was a 2-page offer letter, and my hands went still the moment I started reading. Chief Operating Officer of Ridgeline Freight. $240,000 base salary. Performance bonuses tied to regional growth that could push total compensation to $350. Full equity vesting after 3 years. A relocation package if I wanted to move to Phoenix, or a remote hybrid arrangement if I wanted to stay in Sacramento. Company car allowance. Full family health coverage including dental and vision at 0 cost to me. And a signing bonus of $40,000 payable within 72 hours of accepting. I read it twice, then a third time to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. Curtis sipped his coffee like he was waiting for me to comment on the weather. Curtis, I said carefully, this is a lot of money. It's what you're worth, he said, setting his mug down. My brother Neil and I have been watching Meridian bleed out slowly for 3 years. Ever since that private equity group took a majority stake. They don't understand this business. They understand spreadsheets. And you, Frank, you understand this business. You built half the Southwest freight network they now claim to own. We know it. Our customers know it. And frankly, most of Meridian's customers know it too. Dale jumped in. Frank, here's the thing. We're not just buying your brain. We're buying your reputation. You call any of the 26 major accounts you personally onboarded at Meridian, and I'd bet you dollars to donuts 18 of them would follow you tomorrow. Curtis held up a hand. Now, we're not asking you to poach anyone. We know California non-competes don't enforce, but we don't work like that. We don't want you making calls. We just want you working for us. If clients hear through the grapevine that you've moved and they reach out on their own, that's the free market. That's just people wanting good service. I sat there for a long moment. My coffee was cold. My eggs were untouched. My whole life was sitting on that table in a 2-page letter. When do you need an answer? I asked. When can you give me one? By end of day. Curtis smiled for the first time since he'd sat down. It was a small, tight smile, but it was warm. Take until Friday if you need it. But Frank, understand something. This offer isn't going to sit on the table forever. I've got a board meeting Monday morning. If you're in, I'm announcing you as our new COO. If you're not, we move on to our second choice, and I promise you, You don't want to know who that is because you've worked with him and you don't like him." I laughed. I actually laughed out loud in the middle of that diner, because I knew exactly who he meant. Bradley Coulter's old boss from his consulting days. A guy named Preston Vale who tried to poach me twice and who I told to go pound sand both times. The idea of Preston running Ridgeline made my skin crawl. "I'll have your answer by 3 this afternoon," I said. Curtis nodded, dropped a 20 on the table for coffee neither of us had finished, and slid out of the booth. "Frank," he said, standing over me, "one more thing. Whatever happens, don't sign that consulting offer at Meridian. It's a trap. The moment you sign that, you're locked into a modified non-compete with fresh dates. My lawyer already looked at the standard template Meridian uses. Don't touch it." He walked out. Dale stayed behind, grinning at me over his coffee like a kid on Christmas morning. "Frank," he said, "you have any idea what you're about to do?" I looked at him and I thought about Bradley's teeth, thought about Cynthia's pity face, thought about 22 years of Christmas Eves in a warehouse. "Yeah, Dale, I know exactly what I'm about to do." I drove home from Marley's diner with my mind moving faster than my truck. There was a plan forming in my head, and it needed to be executed with precision. Because here's the thing nobody tells you about corporate warfare. You don't win by throwing punches. You win by being 3 moves ahead while the other guy is still admiring his fist. I called my employment attorney the moment I got home. Her name was Rebecca Ackhaffer, sharp as a razor, based out of San Francisco. I'd kept her card in my wallet since that $400 consultation 2 years back. She picked up on the third ring, and when I explained the situation in 90 seconds flat, she went quiet for about 10 seconds. Then she said, "Frank, cancel your afternoon. I'm driving up. I'll be at your house by 1. She showed up at 12:50 in a black Audi wearing a charcoal suit and carrying a leather folio that looked like it cost more than my monthly grocery bill. Diane made her coffee. We sat at the kitchen table. Rebecca read the Meridian Consulting offer twice, made 3 phone calls, then looked at me and said, "Frank, this offer is designed to trap you. If you sign this, the fresh date non-compete language buried in Section 11 would give Meridian 24 months of leverage, not 12. You'd be effectively locked out of the industry until the end of next year, and the $42,000 salary would be enough for their lawyers to argue it constitutes ongoing employment, which resets the whole clock." I felt sick. I'd almost missed it. I'd been so focused on the pay cut that I hadn't noticed the noose. Rebecca then read the Ridgeline offer. She smiled, actually smiled, when she got to page 2. "This is clean. This is a legitimate offer from a legitimate competitor. Sign this and you're protected. California non-competes don't enforce, and Curtis Ridgeline's lawyers have clearly structured this to keep you off the hook in Arizona too. You're free to take this the moment you formally decline Meridian's consulting offer, provided you do it in writing today before 5 p.m. I called Curtis at 2:15, told him yes. He said, "Welcome to the family, Frank. Neil and I look forward to meeting you Monday morning." I called Cynthia at Meridian at 2:40, left her a voicemail declining the consulting offer and formally resigning my position effective immediately, citing the material breach of my employment terms due to the 77% compensation reduction. Rebecca had drafted the language over my shoulder. Every word was a landmine. She'd already emailed a formal letter to Meridian's HR and legal departments by 3. At 3:15, my phone started ringing. "Cynthia." I let it go to voicemail. Then Bradley called. Voicemail. Then a number I didn't recognize, which turned out to be Meridian's chief legal officer, a woman named Patricia Yun. I answered that one because Rebecca was still sitting at my kitchen table and she nodded at me to pick up. Patricia was polite. Too polite. The kind of polite that means someone is about to threaten you. "Frank, we're surprised by your voicemail. We were under the impression you were reviewing our generous consulting arrangement. Perhaps we can revisit the terms." Rebecca leaned over and whispered in my ear. "Patricia," I said, "I'm not interested in revisiting anything. I'm formally resigning. My attorney has already sent the paperwork." "Your attorney?" Patricia's voice sharpened. "Frank, are you aware that your employment agreement includes a non-solicitation clause? If you're considering any moves that might involve our clients, I'd strongly encourage you to reconsider. I looked at Rebecca. She smiled. Patricia, I said, I'm aware of every clause in my agreement. I've read it more times than you have. I have no intention of soliciting anyone. But I'd encourage you to have your team review California Business and Professions Code Section 16,600 before you send me any threatening letters. It might save you some embarrassment. The line went dead. Rebecca laughed out loud. Frank, she said, you just declared war. Monday morning, I walked into Ridgeline Freight's headquarters in Phoenix wearing a navy suit I'd bought Saturday afternoon at a Nordstrom Rack outlet because my old ones didn't fit right anymore. 22 years of stress eating and skipped lunches will do that. Curtis met me in the lobby. Neil Ridgeline, the younger brother, was there too, 64 years old, shorter than Curtis but with the same sharp eyes and quiet handshake. Neil pulled me aside before we walked into the boardroom and said, Frank, whatever you did over there at Meridian, whatever you built, we want you to know this. You're not replacing anyone here. This role is yours. We built it around you. I've had a lot of moments in my career. That one landed different. The board meeting was 17 people around a walnut table older than I was. Curtis introduced me. I gave a 15-minute presentation I'd built over the weekend on where I thought Ridgeline could go in the next 36 months. Regional consolidation. Warehouse automation the smart way, not the flashy MBA way. Fleet electrification pilots in urban corridors. Cold chain expansion into the Vegas and Salt Lake markets that Meridian had been ignoring because Bradley's predecessor had killed the initiative 18 months earlier. When I finished, an older woman at the end of the table, turned out she was Neil's wife and the CFO, said, Frank, how quickly can you start? I said, I already started, this morning, right now. The room laughed. Curtis clapped me on the shoulder, and just like that I had a new home. By Wednesday, the news had leaked. Someone at Meridian, probably in HR, had let it slip on a shipping industry Slack group that I'd been quote-unquote let go. Someone else, probably at Ridgeline, had let it slip that I'd been hired as COO. The industry connected the dots in about 45 minutes. My phone started ringing Wednesday afternoon and didn't stop for 3 weeks. First call was from Marcus Whitfield, Senior VP of Logistics at Sunbelt Grocers. 22 years of doing business with me personally. Sunbelt was Meridian's largest single account, worth about $6.2 million a year. Marcus didn't waste time. Frank, is it true? Marcus, I can't discuss the circumstances of my departure, but yes, I've joined Ridgeline as their new COO. Frank, our contract with Meridian is up for renewal in 90 days. Give me a reason to consider Ridgeline. I didn't solicit him. Legally, ethically, I didn't. I told him I'd be happy to connect him with Ridgeline's sales team if he wanted to explore options. That was it. He said thank you and hung up. Sunbelt signed a 3-year exclusive with Ridgeline 6 weeks later. $6.2 million in annual revenue. Meridian's largest single account. Gone. Then came Cascade Beverage. Then Vermeer Industrial. Then Kellerman Ag. Then Fresno Fresh, McKinnon Distributors, and Sunset Pharmacy Supply. All accounts I'd personally onboarded at Meridian. All accounts that had specifically been managed by my team for over a decade. All accounts whose CEOs and VPs had my personal cell phone number, and every single one of them called me, not the other way around. Every single one of them made their own decision. By the end of month 2 at Ridgeline, we'd signed $19 million in new annual recurring revenue. All former Meridian accounts. All voluntarily migrated, all completely legal. Meridian stock, which was publicly traded through the private equity holding company, dropped 14% between June and August. The Sacramento Business Journal ran a piece titled Meridian Logistics Faces Southwest Exodus, and my name was mentioned exactly twice. Bradley Coulter's name was mentioned 6 times. None of the mentions were flattering. Then, in early September, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. A woman's voice. Mr. Halloran. My name is Danielle Joe. I'm with the Securities and Exchange Commission. We have some questions about disclosures made by Meridian Holdings during the second quarter earnings call. Do you have 20 minutes? I sat down slowly. Yes, I said. I have 20 minutes. I took that call in my new office at Ridgeline, closed the door, and set my phone on the desk. Danielle Jo was polite, professional, and specific. She wasn't fishing. She had a list of questions, and she went through them like a surgeon. Mr. Halloran, during Meridian Holdings' second quarter earnings call on July 18th, CFO Anthony Marchetti stated, and I'm quoting directly, that the company had, quote, no material client attrition and remained on track to hit projected revenue targets for the fiscal year, end quote. Are you aware whether that statement was accurate at the time it was made? I paused. Because here's the thing. I knew exactly what had been happening at Meridian in June and July. I'd left in May, but I still had friends there. Good friends. People who'd called me crying after Bradley started running quarterly review meetings like a college business school case study. And I knew factually that by mid-July, Meridian had already lost Sunbelt, Cascade, and Vermeer. That was over $11 million in annual recurring revenue. Gone. Signed away. Papers filed. Ms. Joe, I said carefully, I can't speak to what Mr. Marchetti knew or didn't know, but I can tell you that by July 18th, at least 3 major client contracts had either been terminated or notice of non-renewal had been formally delivered to Meridian. I'd be happy to provide contract dates if you have subpoena authority to request them from the clients directly. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Mr. Halloran, we appreciate your professionalism. We're not asking you to disclose anything protected by your former employment. We're asking questions based on public information and public statements. Would you be willing to speak with our team more formally? I said yes. Rebecca Ackhaffer was on the phone with me within the hour, and by end of business Friday she'd arranged a formal interview with the SEC's regional office. I was not a target. I was not a subject. I was, in legal terms, a witness with contextual knowledge. Rebecca made that crystal clear on the record before I said a single word. What I didn't know at the time, and what came out later, was that Danielle Jo wasn't just fishing about the earnings call. The SEC had been quietly investigating Meridian Holdings for 8 months already. A whistleblower complaint had been filed back in February by someone still inside the company, and I have my suspicions about who, but I've never asked and I never will. The complaint alleged that Meridian's private equity ownership group had been systematically inflating client retention metrics, hiding contract renewals that were actually short-term extensions dressed up as multi-year deals, and reporting projected revenue from prospects as if they were signed accounts. In other words, they were cooking the books, and they'd been cooking them for a long time. My interview with the SEC took place on a Tuesday in mid-September. It lasted 4 hours. I answered every question truthfully. I turned over emails I'd sent and received during my final 6 months at Meridian that showed I'd repeatedly raised concerns to Bradley and to senior leadership about the client attrition risk. I had a paper trail. I'd kept it because Rebecca had told me 2 years earlier, during that $400 consultation, to always keep copies of any email where you raised a concern to leadership. Send it to your personal email the same day. Never delete anything. It might save your life someday. That advice saved my life. 3 weeks after my SEC interview, Meridian's board received formal notice that the company was under active investigation. The auditors arrived on site the first week of October, not the friendly kind. The kind that come with warrants and forensic accountants and lawyers in matching gray suits. They set up shop in the Sacramento headquarters, which happened to be the exact building I'd walked out of in May. Bradley Coulter, my $42,000 a year replacement offer negotiator, was reportedly still in his office when they arrived. I heard he didn't take it well. The news of the SEC investigation hit the trade press on October 11th, a short article in Freight Waves, then a longer piece in the Wall Street Journal 3 days later. Then Bloomberg picked it up. By Halloween, every logistics executive from Seattle to San Antonio had read some version of the story, and Meridian Holdings stock had cratered 38% from its June high. I want to be clear about something. I didn't celebrate. Not out loud. Not to Diane, not to Curtis, not to Dale. There's a certain kind of man who dances on graves, and I've never wanted to be that man. Because inside that building, alongside Bradley and Cynthia and Patricia Yun, were 380 other employees. Warehouse workers, dispatchers, drivers, admins, people who had families and mortgages and kids in braces, people who hadn't done anything wrong, people who had, in fact, done everything right for years. The day the WSJ article dropped, I got a call from a woman named Marta Delgado. Marta had been my administrative assistant at Meridian for 11 years. She was 58 years old, widowed, supporting her granddaughter after her daughter had died of an overdose 4 years earlier. Marta was the backbone of my office, the reason my calendar worked, the reason contracts got filed correctly, the reason I remembered my anniversary 3 years running. "Frank," she said, and her voice was already breaking, "they're doing layoffs. They announced it this morning. 200 people. I'm on the list. My last day is November 15th. I sat down at my desk in Phoenix and I closed my eyes. "Marta," I said, "how fast can you get to Arizona?" There was a pause. "Frank, I have Sophia. I can't just move. Her school, her friends, everything." "Marta, I'm not asking you to move. I'm asking you if you'd be willing to work remote. I need an executive assistant. Ridgeline has already approved a remote arrangement for 2 of my direct reports. You'd keep your house, keep Sophia in school, and you'd start at $72,000 a year with full benefits, which, if I remember right, is about 20 grand more than Meridian was paying you." She started crying. I let her. She said yes on a Tuesday. She started the following Monday. I did the same thing for 6 other former Meridian employees over the next 90 days, not because I was building an army. Not because I was trying to gut Meridian further. They were doing that to themselves just fine. I did it because these were good people who had done good work, and they were about to get chewed up by a corporate machine that had never valued them in the first place. Curtis and Neil signed off on every single hire without hesitation. Curtis actually pulled me aside after the 4th one and said, "Frank, this is exactly what we hoped you'd bring here. Not just the accounts, the people. The way you take care of people." Meanwhile, the SEC investigation was widening. In late October, the U.S. Attorney's Office announced it was reviewing the case for potential criminal referrals. Anthony Marchetti, the CFO who'd made the false earnings statement, quietly resigned in early November, citing personal reasons. 2 weeks later, the Meridian board fired the CEO, a private equity plant named Roland Beckett who'd never spent a single day in operations. Bradley Coulter, my golden boy replacement, was named interim COO in a desperate move to plug the leadership vacuum. Bradley lasted 3 weeks in that role. I heard later from Marta, who still had friends inside, that Bradley walked into his second board meeting and tried to present a slide deck about, and I'm not making this up, quote-unquote synergy-driven vertical integration strategies leveraging AI-powered logistics optimization. The board chairman, a 71-year-old retired trucking executive named Warren Kastenmeier, reportedly stood up, walked out, and told his assistant on the way out, "Fire that kid before he opens his mouth again." Bradley was gone by Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving that year was the first one in over a decade where I actually sat down at the table with my family and didn't check my phone once. Diane made a turkey. Emma made cornbread stuffing from scratch, the same recipe my mother used to make because I'd taught her the year before during one of the rare weekends I'd been actually present. My brother came in from Sacramento with his wife and their 2 kids. We ate, we laughed, we watched football. And around 8 o'clock, when everyone had migrated to the living room for pie, Emma pulled me aside in the kitchen. "Dad," she said, "I got in." I blinked. "Got in where?" "UCLA, early admission." "I got the email this morning." I hugged her so hard I nearly lifted her off the ground. She was crying. I was crying. Diane walked in and started crying too when we told her. Emma had wanted UCLA since she was 13 years old. And now, thanks to a bourbon-fueled phone call to Dale Kowalski back in May, thanks to a 2-page offer letter from a man named Curtis Ridgeline, thanks to a plan that had started with a corporate ambush and ended with a career I'd never dreamed possible, I could actually afford to send her. Full ride, cash, no loans, no debt, no compromises. That night after everyone went to bed, I sat on the back porch with a glass of bourbon and I thought about the man I'd been in May. That guy in the fluorescent-lit HR office, hands folded, watching Bradley Coulter smile at him with his two white teeth. That guy who thought his entire life was ending. That guy who'd walked to his truck with his knees shaking, wondering how he was going to tell his family. I raised my glass to that guy because he'd done something right. He'd walked out of that office without signing anything. He'd made the phone call. He'd trusted Dale. He'd trusted Curtis. He'd trusted Rebecca. He'd trusted himself. That's the thing nobody teaches you in 22 years of corporate loyalty. They teach you to trust the company. They teach you to trust the mission statement, the values on the wall, the CEO's town hall speech about family and integrity. But they never teach you to trust yourself, to trust your own instincts, to trust the network you've built, to trust the reputation you've earned, one late night and one Christmas Eve at a time. The SEC investigation wrapped up in March of the following year. Meridian Holdings paid a fine of $41 million for securities fraud related to the misleading earnings statements. The private equity group that had owned it was forced to divest. The company was sold, piece by piece, over the next 18 months. The Southwest Regional operation, my baby, the thing I'd built from 3 trucks to a $42 million operation, was acquired by, and I could not make this up if I tried, Ridgeline Freight, for a fraction of its book value. Curtis put me in charge of the integration. I walked back into the Sacramento headquarters on a Tuesday in September, 17 months after I'd walked out of Cynthia's fishbowl office. This time, I wasn't wearing jeans and a polo. I was wearing that same navy suit from Nordstrom Rack, now tailored properly, and I had Marta Delgado walking beside me carrying the transition binders. Cynthia was still there. She'd survived the layoff somehow. When she saw me walking down the hallway, she went pale. I stopped at her office door, knocked once. She looked up and forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Frank," she said, "welcome back." "Cynthia," I said, "you're being reassigned, effective immediately. You'll be reporting to a woman named Rebecca Ackefer for the duration of the integration. She's my chief compliance officer. She has some questions for you about several personnel files." Cynthia's smile disappeared entirely. I walked away without waiting for her response. 2 years have passed since that Tuesday I walked back into the Sacramento office. Ridgeline Freight is now the second largest freight logistics operator in the Southwest, closing in fast on the #1 spot. My title is now president of Ridgeline Southwest Operations, which means I run everything from the Mexican border up to the Oregon line, from the Pacific coast to the New Mexico state boundary. 612 employees, $184 million in annual revenue, 31 distribution centers, and I still remember every single warehouse manager's first name. Curtis and Neil offered me a seat on the Ridgeline Board of Directors last spring. I accepted. I'm the first non-family board member in the company's 53-year history. Curtis told me at the ceremony that Neil had insisted on it, said their father would have approved. I don't know what to do with a compliment like that except try to live up to it every single day. Emma just finished her sophomore year at UCLA. She's carrying a 3.9 GPA in mechanical engineering, and she's spending this summer interning at a robotics firm in Pasadena. She calls me every Sunday. Sometimes we talk for an hour. Sometimes we talk for 5 minutes. Both are fine. Both are treasures I never had time for during the Meridian years. Deanne and I renewed our vows last October in Sedona, 25 years. She wore the same dress she'd worn the first time, and somehow it still fit. I cried through the whole ceremony. She laughed at me the whole way through the reception. That woman kept our family together through years of my absence, my exhaustion, my constant checking of the phone at dinner. She deserved every second of that ceremony and every year of the life we're building now. Bradley Coulter, I heard, ended up taking a role at a boutique consulting firm in Denver. He never worked in logistics operations again. Cynthia was terminated from Meridian, then hired at a smaller regional carrier, then terminated again 8 months later. Patricia Yun, the legal officer who'd threatened me, ended up with her law license suspended for 18 months after the SEC investigation revealed she'd been aware of the false earnings statements and had signed off on the disclosures anyway. Anthony Marchetti, the CFO, pled guilty to 1 count of securities fraud, and served 11 months at a federal facility in Lompoc. Roland Beckett, the CEO, fled to Portugal, which does not have an extradition treaty for white-collar crimes of that specific class. Last I heard, he was running a wine bar in Lisbon and drinking most of his own inventory. Dale Kowalski retired last year at 63. Curtis threw him a party at the Ridgeline Warehouse in Phoenix. 300 people showed up. I gave the toast. I told the story of that bourbon-soaked conversation in Vegas 8 years earlier when Dale had told me to call him if Meridian ever pushed me out. I told the crowd that Dale hadn't just saved my career. He'd saved my family. He'd saved my life. Dale cried. I cried. Even Curtis cried, and Curtis is a man who has, to my knowledge, cried exactly 3 times in his adult life. Here's what I want you to take from this story, whoever you are, wherever you're watching from. If you're sitting in a job right now that's slowly grinding you down, if you're being told you're lucky to be there, if you're being handed pay cuts and expected to smile, if some kid with a fresh MBA is being promoted over you while you train him on the job you built with your own hands, listen to me carefully. You are not stuck. You are not disposable. Your reputation, your relationships, your years of quiet, unnoticed excellence, they are worth more than any corporate title. Make the phone call. Trust the people you've earned trust with. Walk out of the room with your head up. And when they finally realize what they lost, don't answer. You'll be too busy building something better.